I do look at people who are exceptional, not thinking about the game, but thinking about the market, and then figuring out what game works for the market. I love that approach a lot more, and I've seen success in that approach a lot more than, oh yeah, I love this game, let's make this game.
Joakim Achrén is a games investor and the founder of Elite Game Developers, a popular newsletter for game studio founders. As a studio founder himself, Joakim is uniquely positioned to understand what it takes to make a game studio successful. Join us as we explore the business of gaming and the challenges and opportunities of being a games investor. Today, we have Joakim Achrén here with us. Did I pronounce that right, Joakim?
Yeah, it's good. I love all the different versions.
Okay. Oh, I love that.
The Finnish version is Joakim.
Joakim. And last name?
Achrén. You got that really, that went well. That was superb.
Awesome. Anyway, welcome to Game Thinking TV.
Thanks, Amy. Great to be here.
So excited to get to talk to you and find out more about your fascinating background, what you're doing now, what you're excited about in the future. So let's start with a glimpse into your work life. So
Sure.
You worked in games for many years. Now you're a gaming investor. What does your day look like? Who are you talking to? What kind of decisions do you make?
Yeah, it's a really good question. If I just peek into my calendar, it's probably full of different investors across the board that I'm collaborating with, talking with, some portfolio companies. There's a bunch of new companies as well that I'm looking at. Usually my mornings are dedicated to content creation for Elite Game Developers, which is my newsletter and podcast. So I do spend a couple of hours every day working on content. And I think it's an area where I really don't want to drop the ball at all. So it's just a lot of focus on putting in an effort there and then taking care of the calls in the afternoon. So that's my typical day.
Tell us more about Elite Game Developers. What motivated you to start that?
Well, I was a founder for several years. I had an itch to create content already between starting my last company, Next Games, and the time I was at Supercell for a few years. I had the feeling that I want to start sharing content online. Podcasting was picking up in the early 2010s and blogging already was a big thing. So newsletters as a format yet wasn't the big thing. Then I was jumping off the operational side of Next Games in 2019, and I was really obsessed with bringing in a new format like newsletters and creating a newsletter that people would recognize as the go-to source for gaming startup founders. So that was the premise. I didn't really know how it's going to go. It felt okay. It might be that it's not big enough, that there's not a big enough audience. Although now, 4 years later, it's grown to close to 10,000 subscribers. So I think I'm quite pleased with how it's turned out. And I don't really know a lot of founders who don't know the newsletter. So I think that's already a sort of a criteria that I'm happy with.
Awesome. So tell us about your syndicate that you've created that's associated with the Elite Game Developers, because that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it was an idea. Jason Calacanis, who's the host of All In podcast, and he's been around for a long time creating content and talking about his angel investing stuff. So he wrote a book 5 years ago, came out. I was reading the book, and he talks about his syndicate model that he brings in a group of people, sort of like you can join, and we're going to invest together. Jason leads the deal. He also takes a carried interest from basically profit share of the total sum invested by the group. So I didn't know if I could do it in Europe because it felt like AngelList and all those facilities were pretty much a US and Bay Area focused endeavor. So I started studying that for a few years, did personal angel investing, tried to set up something in Finland as these kind of special purpose vehicles where the syndicate could invest. I kicked it off, did about 10 deals in Finland with this Finnish setup, and then started expanding it. And now I'm working with a UK-based provider that helps me with the administration stuff for that. So it's a group of gaming executives on a Slack channel or workspace. So I have probably 230 people now on this Slack group. And I present a deal that, hey, there's this startup that is raising. This is the terms. This is why I think it's a good deal. Here's the pitch deck. Here's an interview I recorded with the founder. what do you say? Are we doing this? And then I post it on the Slack, and then I start collecting commitments from people like 5K, 10K. And then we usually go up to 200K, and then we close it down, and then I start the process with the admin, and then we invest. So it felt like this is something that we should have, because it's involving a big bunch of people who not necessarily are investors, but they can get into that realm through my syndicate. So I think I've introduced angel investing to at least 100 people in gaming throughout the last 2 years.
That's impressive. So they don't have to be accredited investors?
Well, most of them are European, and we don't have those accreditation laws here. So I think we sort of like bypassed that hurdle. But like I do have some US-based investors who are accredited. So it's a good bunch of people.
Interesting. Do you feel like over the years that you've been developing that and investing with that syndicate, looking back, do you feel like that group makes smarter decisions than any one individual?
It's a good question. I was observing this a while ago on my newsletter, where I wrote the 10 lessons that I've learned from 2 years of running the syndicate. And one of the things was like 2021, when things were so frothy all over the place, money was so cheap. And like now looking at that period, I could basically come up with any kind of deal and people would follow. Like it would be, filled up in a matter of like hours. And now this year I've done deals that can't really reach like even a quarter of the allocation that we have, because people are just pulling back a lot. So I think it really reflects on decision making. Sure, there might be things that can be identified better with a group, but I do like to bet on a lot more earlier deals than what I've seen the general sort of group of people who are coming in through this group, who might be very much scared about backing a founder that they don't know, they haven't met them, they haven't had a call with them. Maybe it's too early, but I could have conviction over a deal that the group doesn't have. So it depends.
And it sounds like the macro environment is the biggest influencer.
Yeah, for sure. It's a big deal. People did lose a lot of money in the last 2 years, and there's not that much to go around with right now for startup investing, for sure.
Interesting. So let's wind it way back and talk about how you first got into tech and gaming. The field of gaming has people from so many different backgrounds. One of the things I love about it. And everyone finds their own way. So how did you find your way?
Yeah, I was like a hobbyist as a kid, coding stuff. So I had an Amiga 500, which is like the most coolest computer ever. Unfortunately, it didn't last for long. But that machine was really where I learned to code, built a lot of like hobbyist games. Then in the PC era, I started making more proper games. So I was a coder always. And then during university, I was doing an internship at a company which was doing early mobile games, text-based or WAP protocol-based games, like black and white mobile games. This was like 2000, 2001. Nobody was playing those games, but it still felt like, oh yeah, this is so convenient when you have a gaming device with you in your pocket. Like it felt like the obvious thing. Of course, it took another 10 years to realize that possibility there, but yeah, that was kind of like what sparked me into gaming, was the understanding of mobile and the possibilities there.
Wow. So I noticed you had a job as a metal worker.
Yeah.
One of your first jobs. I can't resist. What was that?
Yeah. Long story short, like version, it was really hard where I was growing up in the city. This was after graduating high school. In Finland, you have the army conscription, sort of like you need to go to the army. So I did that for a stint, and then they threw me out because I had a dislocating shoulder, which you can't have if you go to the army. So they gave me the free pass. So I didn't know what to do. Like I didn't have a spot at any college or university yet. So I decided to pick up any kind of job I could. So I went to this metal factory to do a lot of like factory work, which is really like a life-changing experience to understand what it's like to be a real, like somebody who has their hands full of work. So, yeah.
What did you take from that?
Yeah, so, going to work, doing stuff that probably isn't the most aspirational work, but still getting to work with an awesome team of people. I think the camaraderie and like the things I still think about today, now that I'm working on elite game developers doing this investment work as a solo project, pretty much. I still want to collaborate with other investors because I think the camaraderie of doing things together, even though you're not in the same company, like it's so beneficial. So that's what I picked up from that job.
That's fascinating. I can totally relate. I always feel like relationships are forever, but companies and jobs come and go.
Yeah. you can build those onwards forever.
Exactly. And then interestingly, you formed a company called Iron Forge, and you were making a mobile virtual world long ago, and then you pivoted. But what possessed you to want to build a mobile virtual world, decades ago when you were doing that?
Yeah, it's kind of like Metaverse 1.0, if we're now in the Metaverse 2.0. So I think, Amy, we talked about this, like you were also involved in that sort of way with Second Life and all those like
right.
funky
There.com.
companies.
I was actually a VP at There.com, so
Yeah.
I rode that wave.
Yeah, it was a good wave. It was like a fun, like it was also probably a problematic wave because there was no revenues in that era, or very limited. And also the data-driven aspect of making these services was still such a, like in its infancy. But yeah, the inspiration came from looking at companies like Sulake in Finland, who was doing Habbo Hotel. And yeah, so, okay, I want to try something like this with like a Sims Tamagotchi kind of approach on your phone. So we started making a Java handset-based virtual world. So it was like, there's too many buzzwords and too little concrete things that really worked. So I think we've always been in gaming really like fascinated about the next thing that can happen. But I think the lesson there is that, do you really know what your users want? Is this something that they want to spend time with? Is it entertaining? Is it fun? So I definitely learned that the hard way there with the first company.
I can relate. And then how did you find your way to Supercell?
Yeah, that was like, we tried to get that virtual world working for a while, and then we pivoted to Facebook games just a few years before Facebook basically just killed the whole business. So we did quite well there until it became impossible to operate on Facebook Canvas, and then closed down the company when we couldn't raise another round. And I went to Supercell, actually, who was starting at that point in 2011, joined to help with the analytics side. And it was amazing to see the team being built, like basically like the team getting hired. People were coming in who were amazing game makers. And it was really difficult. First off, like they were still on the Facebook Canvas, impossible to scale really there. And then the mobile sort of like window opened and the teams pivoted to mobile games. So I think it's one of those moments like you're at the right place at the right time with the right team. So that's Supercell.
So you joined them fairly early.
Yeah, I was the 20th like employee or something when they were like in a small, like very small office. Yeah.
That must have been amazing. So Supercell is famously the creator of some astonishing mega hits on mobile. But I've also heard repeatedly that Supercell does something that I've seen the very best game studios do, which is they do tons of early prototyping, tons of early testing, and then only the very best games make it through. A lot of projects don't make it through to ship because they're always testing and refining. Can you speak a little bit to what you saw at Supercell about how projects actually get shipped versus experiments that get shelved?
Yeah, like the good thing, like at that stage was that like there's 5 projects going on for mobile actually when I was there, and 2 of those we know very well, so Heyday and Clash of Clans. And the other projects, like I think the learnings there are like you really need to know what is proven on like free to play, this kind of realm that they were doing, operating in. I think the other projects were too innovative, to be honest. Like there was a lot of mechanics that weren't proven versus this kind of like base builder, battler game already had proof on Facebook Canvas. Also farming games were working really well. So I think that was something that was really helping the company in those early days. I think with this kind of like shelving projects, I think there's nuances in mobile that have been discovered over the years, like things like, oh, you really don't know unless you bring in a scale of critical mass of users into a game, and then it starts working. Like I believe that Brawl Stars actually finally started working after they decided to open more countries to bring in like tens of thousands of daily actives versus like just running a Canadian or an Australian soft launch where you're running in cohorts and seeing what happens. I think that's something that doesn't really work when you're trying to build this kind of a massive gaming sort of like world, which is a Supercell game. So I don't know what happened with Everdale. I really haven't heard how far they took that experiment. But yeah, it's I think the dynamics of mobile have changed a lot in the years. From like 2012, it's totally different now.
It's really interesting. So you're talking about the importance of proven mechanics, of understanding that a certain thing is proven and not going too far ahead. However, lots and lots of companies do the fast follow thing. They look at proven mechanics, proven games, do a clone with a few twists, and often that doesn't work. But somehow Supercell has managed to do these massive hits. Do you have any sense about what's the difference between all the fast copy studios and Supercell?
I think Supercell was there first with a really quality product early on. It's super hard to follow when somebody's already set the bar super high. I think that's what Supercell does really well. It's done the same with Brawl Stars, Clash Royale, where you already have such a quality title, not like somebody else trying it out. Oh yeah, we're gonna, use the same mechanics. You end up with the same audience who's already picked the game they want to play if they're playing that game, that kind of a game. Like, why would you, the fast follow doesn't work really. Although like the proven mechanics that Supercell utilized, they were the first people there on the platform. So yeah.
Right. So that's interesting. So games investing is really tricky, as you know
Yes.
better than probably anybody. So you've had some years and some investments under your belt now. When you're meeting with a team who wants your investment, what are some of the signals you see that make you lean forward, want to know more, and think, this might be it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been thinking about it a lot because so in the last 4 years, I've also been a part of Play Ventures as a part-time VC. I've been looking and helping with the portfolio companies. I think that's helped me a lot in creating more of a sight and sense for what kind of founders to back. So I'm always trying to understand what the founder is thinking versus what the market. Because usually whatever they're doing, whatever idea they have, it reflects on what the founder is thinking. If they're doing like a match 3 game, okay, what is this founder thinking? I need to understand why they picked that. Do they understand what they're doing? So I do look at people who are exceptional in one way or another. And I think the exceptionality usually is like in the business sense. Are they thinking about go-to-market like in an obsessive way over, oh yeah, we just want to make this kind of game versus, oh, we want to go here into this market because this is the opportunity. I think that's much more interesting as a mindset for a founder. That really shifts towards something interesting as they're keeping to learn, they're learning more and more as they go forward with their startup. So yeah.
So market first versus product first, it sounds.
Always.
Interesting.
That's what I've learned, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, you've learned it through pattern matching.
Yeah.
But have there been experiences where you saw that work, where you were kind of surprised? Wow, look at that worked. But who would have thought it?
Yeah. To be honest, not really. There were some moments in mobile games in the last 10 years where somebody could discover a genre where it required that somebody had the insight in the team. Like one of those companies is Small Giant Games with Empires and Puzzles. I think the company was, with the founding team, they were sort of experimenting with different kind of side-scrolling runner games and really simple casual products. And then they hired one creative from the outside who came in, and that person came up with the idea of Empires and Puzzles, and the whole company shifted into an RPG studio from making casual games. And a few years later, Zynga bought them for almost $1 billion. So I think the lesson there is that the founders were malleable to shift when there was insights that they didn't know about. They had a hire that knew what needed to be done, and the founders were ready to embrace that kind of knowledge. So I think that's also an interesting thing when I'm looking at founders who might be making a game I don't like at all. It's still, okay, who are these people underneath? How good are they? They might just be, not the best makers of game ideas. So they're missing that component in the team.
Interesting. What are your experiences with founders who've made games before and are now doing another game versus founder who might be technical, but it's their first game?
The repeat people have seen problems. They've gone through a lot of hardship usually. So that's always a big plus. So somebody who's going after it, maybe Like the problem with the repeat person could be that they're not going into the same area where they were challenged before. Like if they try to tackle a totally different kind of field, let's say somebody's been doing games and all of a sudden they start building services for games. It's not always something you can transfer those challenges. So it depends. Like I've seen really good pivots from B2C to B2B as well. So then it also goes down to, okay, is this founder somebody who can do anything? They could build any kind of product because they're so good at them go-to-market and thinking about the business side of things. So
that's interesting. So we talked a little bit about the, let's go signals that make you lean forward and get more interested. And it sounds like a lot of it's about the team and the people and the way they're thinking, particularly the founder.
Yep.
So on that same note, this is super useful for our audience. What are some of the lean back signals, the red flags? Like you're listening to a pitch, getting to know someone, you see or hear something that makes you go, maybe not.
Yeah.
What are those red flags for you?
Yeah, if the founders aren't really seeing where the puck is going, let's say that you have a group now who would be starting a mobile free-to-play studio. It's okay. Is this the best you could do? It's like very harsh, but like I think you want to be researching what you're going into and what are the challenges and can you even build something that is venture backable? I think that's a big question that people don't really think about. What is something where you can win in this race of doing staged financing, where you're going to pre-seed, seed, Series A, like that route? It's pretty easy to actually think about, okay, like I need to grow this business in a certain way to actually have that staged financing like path work for me. Like if they're not thinking about that way, I think I can spot them quite easily nowadays. It does create a lot of issues for me that I'm seeing like 1,000 companies a year and then I can only bet in a few of them because like it's so rare that people are doing that. So then I do want to sometimes take the founders on this kind of journey to think about, should you actually be thinking about these kind of things? And then I want to see what they come up with like in a week or so. And then like when they get back to me, I'll see what they thought about. So
interesting. Very interesting. So let's dig in on what you mentioned about mobile free-to-play gaming studio. Is that the best you can do? I think you're talking about this larger trend that's going on in gaming. So let me prime the pump and then get your thoughts. So we were chatting before the stream started about the Game Developers Conference, GDC, which is the big conference that happens every year. I was able to go to some of that, and there were a few really big themes this year. One of which was the perhaps overstated mobile is dead. Every person I met up with for coffee or drinks or dinner, hey, what are you getting out of the show this year? First thing out of their mouth, oh, have you heard mobile's dead? And of course, mobile's not dead, but things are radically changing in that market. Crypto is certainly not as exciting as it used to be. And AI is everywhere and on everyone's tongue. So what are you seeing from your perspective about what's changing in the gaming landscape and what the smartest founders are thinking?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of companies who raised in the last 2 to 3 years for mobile free play. And the challenge for them is like, how do they actually go to the next stage? Can they even raise another round? They might need to go to their existing investors to convince them to continue backing them. But it's more about, okay, they need to ship games. They need to get to revenues quite quickly, like show growth on the runway that they right now have. So I think that's a good pressure, since there's going to be like the companies that don't really survive this kind of pressure, like likelihood they would all eventually anyways fold, like in the previous model, the pre-IDFA world where UA was still, targeting was easier. But I think the death of mobile is quite premature, I would say. I think there's changes that will happen in the platform. We still have over 3 billion people who are playing games on phones. So I think it's more about, distribution doesn't work at all like it used to. So let's figure out new things.
Yeah, and for folks who don't understand those major drivers, let's just spell it out. Why distribution changed so radically?
Yeah. So there was Apple's privacy changes, where they decided that it's not okay for developers to actually share private information about users, how they're spending in these games and share that with the ad networks so that the ad networks could you monetize these users by sending them to another game, like at a very high price tag. So I think that movement made it so that we're not going to see these billion-dollar mobile exits for the foreseeable future unless there's something radically changing, some other way to continue targeting these big spenders and creating like these super games that are top grossing. So yeah, I don't know, like what does it look like though?
Yeah, so what you're talking about is changes in UA, user acquisition.
Exactly.
And that's really what's on everybody's minds who's been working in mobile free to play. And a lot of folks are really feeling that pinch. Now let's talk about what's replacing it.
Yeah, that's
The
a good
big
question.
thing that I see is early community building, partly because that's my wheelhouse, understanding how to do that, etc. But I've gotten a flood of calls of people saying, oops, can't do this anymore. How exactly is it that you build that launch community so you can, leverage them? But there's probably other ways as well. What are you seeing? What kind of shift are you seeing?
I think it's slow. People are still sort of recovering from trying to understand that there is no performance marketing for gaming as it used to be, like at the same scale. So I think that's a shift that's gradually happening towards everybody embracing an early community. Since if you can get like thousands of fans for your game before you ship a game, I think it's okay. It's not like the big success that you might have thought that your game will have, but it's something that could take your company to break even like quite quickly. And if you sort of double down on those early community aspects, you create an email list where you can directly target your users, a Discord where you keep like a live ops mentality of the Discord going, that people are anticipating coming back to the Discord every day to see what's going on. I think all those activities are things that people shouldn't leave out in as they're approaching the growth of a game title nowadays.
Right. And it's the importance of that, I think, has changed with these shifts in Apple's policies.
Yeah.
At least
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So you've worked with both first-time gaming entrepreneurs and serial gaming entrepreneurs now in your investing career. What are some of the common mistakes that you see folks make that, we all have to make mistakes to learn, but you really wish people could leverage the learning and not make those mistakes? What are some of the cul-de-sacs people make, or just things that you would advise other startup entrepreneurs to learn from?
Yeah, I think it is the things we've been talking about here, like not thinking about the game, but thinking about the market, and then figuring out what game works for the market. I think it's an interesting way to come up with ideas as well. If you're brainstorming for ideas, like not just, oh yeah, like those games are really cool, but rather, okay, that audience is actually super interesting. They're not being catered to at all. Like what could be a good game for that audience, and just focus on finding that game for the audience. I think I love that approach a lot more, and I've seen success in that approach a lot more than, oh yeah, I love this game, let's make this game.
Could you give an example where you've seen success there?
I think on the casual side, it's been pretty commonplace. Like word puzzle games have actually, like somebody's wanted to actually go after people who love evergreen games, so they started trying out different kind of games. So like puzzle games, card games, things like that. And there's a lot of these under the radar gaming companies out there that are making big casual titles. They could have a portfolio of 20 casual titles combined, like run rate of 20-30 million a year. I think that's an awesome business versus, okay, doubling down on one big game that you maybe soft launch in 2 to 3 years and you never know if it's going to work or not. So
yeah, that's a real challenge with games. To make something interesting often takes a while.
Yeah.
And so how do you get something out there quicker? But I want to circle back to the underserved markets, because that's really what you're talking about, is identifying and understanding the desires of an underserved market. So interestingly, that literally our approach is figuring that out. So we do that a particular way. How do you do that? Have you seen smart companies do that? If someone says, I love that advice, how do I do it? What would you advise them to do?
Yeah, it's quite tricky actually to start building a knowledge base about an audience. One way to do that is actually to bring on your team, people who worked with games that are that the audience that you want to target, there's a teammate that you have that has experience from working with games that are for that audience, and you can learn from them and then start thinking, okay, what is that audience looking for right now, to actually have insights of what they had from previous work. Yeah, I think defining like what is your audience, it really boils down to going after what you want to do. What are the opportunities that you're seeing? Sort of like thinking outside of the box. So, okay, this is like we want to do a shooter. Like, why would you want to do a shooter? I think it's also those questions that I want to try to ask in those meetings. I have so many questions for the founders usually, and like all of them boil down to like, how do they approach picking something that they want to tackle, the area where they want to go into. So I think there's many ways, but I think one of the best ways is to just be obsessed about figuring things out on your own.
Interesting. So right now, as you look out at the market, and I notice because I follow you, and by the way, everybody should follow this brilliant person, and we will share a link in the show notes and make sure that you can get links to elite game developer. But I noticed that you play a lot of games, as many of the best people in gaming do. You just, get in there and play. What games right now are doing a good job of delighting their audience? Where are you getting inspiration? What are you enjoying?
Good question. Yeah, there's so many. I do look up to Epic and Fortnite a lot. I think they're setting up like the example for core gaming, as this is the way you need to run a live operation for a big title. So I really appreciate their work into being as a role model for everybody who's doing a game that is cross-platform, that operates anywhere. Like, I think everybody can learn from them. On the mobile side, I think it's still Supercell. If you go and look at their titles, they're always pushing the live operations of all the Clash of Clans, Clash Royale really heavily. And there's always a delightful return when you come back to those games after a year of not playing. So these games they're not going to go anywhere. Like Fortnite is going to be here probably in 100 years still, attracting people to play. So like those kind of inspirations are really amazing.
UX designer Celia Hoden on a few weeks back, and that was really interesting to hear about some of the heavy lifting that went into that amazing game, which of course iterated its way into Battle Royale success, right? It wasn't initially a huge success. Another lesson, right? Sometimes got to keep iterating, but those are fantastic examples. Now, I can't resist digging a little bit into Brawl Stars. Speaking of Supercell, Brawl Stars, you mentioned, that's a very successful game. But Supercell recently pulled loot boxes out of Brawl Stars. Yeah. Do you know about that?
No, actually, I have my own options or my own opinions on these kind of moves. I think it's when you have a game that is targeted, or I don't know if by intention or not, but like the player base is quite young. I think it's a good move for Supercell to be preemptively thinking about monetization through gotcha mechanics and things like that. So I really applaud their move there. I don't know if people need to follow that example. I think there were exception in the crowd of user base that's very young. So I would say like for the mature audience, games that have loot boxes, it doesn't really change the dynamics of if you're buying a pack of Magic the Gathering cards, you're still like it's the loot box experience as well. It's an endless debate, but I personally feel like it's for the mature audience. I wouldn't categorize it as gambling or anything like that.
Let's put a pin in that, because that's a rabbit hole we could go way down.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm really interested in your perspective. Thank you for sharing that. And it's really interesting about Fortnite, etc. So now let's look forward a bit. So what are the current trends or edge trends that you personally are following and interested in right now?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, Fortnite. So Fortnite's the creative mode. I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, tell me more. What are your thoughts about that? I was blown away. I'm like, oh my God, this opens Pandora's box.
Yeah, I love it. Like in any way possible. I'm hoping that there's going to be a lot of winners that emerge as new businesses around this model, that it's not that Epic makes it possible to have a lot of winners. You might think that, okay, there's somebody who's going to corner the market, but I don't know if there's an opportunity for studios. If you look at Roblox, who has had this model, I think it's been lucrative for some developers, but usually you can't really build a game studio that makes Roblox games as a venture backable studio. I haven't seen a successful one emerge yet that really did that off the bat. There's a lot of attempts. Let's see what happens in the near future. But I feel if you think about Facebook Canvas, which also was a gaming, like a creative sort of opening for developers to go and utilize the user base. I believe that the opportunity was there because the competition wasn't that high in the early days. But if you think about Roblox, there has been content built for the platform for 10 years or something. So now building a gaming studio and Roblox, yeah, it's challenging. And I don't know if it's going to be the same for Fortnite as well. We'll see what happens.
Interesting. Yeah, well, one of the things that underlies this shift that ties back to the earlier changes in mobile gaming we're talking about is changing business models. And I'd just like to know what runs through your mind there. You touched on the big spenders. It's harder to monetize the big spenders. And in free to play, what we call whales, AKA big spenders, a term that comes from gambling, that was a part of the monetization. And there's a whole model built around that.
Yeah.
So with this shift and with platforms like Roblox and Fortnite emerging that perhaps have many medium winners rather than big winners, that also shifts possibly how we monetize. What are your thoughts about monetization frontiers and what's going to be happening over the next year or two?
Yeah. I think the area where I'm really keen on seeing things happening is like pushing both ads and in-app purchases to a direction where it's not so much about the hunting of the whales sort of aspect. It's a bit like built into the performance marketing era of where you're spending to get like bigger spenders in, and that's a like forever loop. So if we're exiting that kind of approach, it'd be great to actually get into more of these kind of like fan-based games. Like we were just talking about the early communities that you could be building and then utilizing that community to actually bootstrap your game and get it off the ground. So you're leaving and ejecting this whale model because you're not like dependent on growing a big business through a whale monetization. I think there's a lot to do in that fan base audience building and then making that as an interesting way to both for ads and for IAPs.
That's really interesting. So shifting more toward a pop culture fan model.
Yeah, that would be amazing to see.
Interesting. Well, we'll keep our eyes open. So I can't resist. What experience are you having and what's your perspective on AI right now? There's obviously a flood of things happening. I know the investors in my circles are just getting flooded with various quality of pitches. So as a gaming investor, how do you digest this and kind of tune what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of hype and also clutter when I'm looking at a pitch deck, and it's sort of I'm trying to understand what's in this deck because it's full of like different kind of GPT-4 buzzword mid-journey stuff. So like it's been really hard for the last few months to actually see if there's something underlying that is really like a gem in a pitch that I'm seeing. Usually those companies aren't really like pushing the bold font text of AI that much. So it's been difficult, but I'm really like keen to see like how companies start using AI as a way for players to do this user-generated content for other players. I think that's a realm that I'm most excited about at the moment.
Can you say a little bit more about what you're imagining that might look like?
Yeah, think about like GTA, where you have AI basically. The user is using AI to curate like a GTA-based like a world where you have missions, characters, NPCs, like linear story content. ChatGPT is really good at like coming up with a short story, for instance, already now. Like how far are we actually from translating like a crime story into a setting in GTA through this kind of AI curation? So I don't know, like that's what I'm fascinated about.
So game asset.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. And I found this incredibly interesting. And I know folks are also going to be helpful. I mean, it's going to be helpful to them. And everyone, elitegamedevelopers.com. That's where you can subscribe. You can follow Joakim on LinkedIn and Twitter and other social media. He's awesome. You'll learn so much about gaming and investing and startups. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.